Hello, I'm Fantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be answering all the various questions posed on the previous February question time video. So, without further ado, Austin Another says, thanks for all you do. I appreciate it. X Random Donalds asks, how do I get my girlfriend to play Pad? Well, the best way to get someone to play Pad is create an account for them. Basically, give them an alt account of some way so it's been developed. It will help bypass all the weird, awkward grind at the beginning and play co-op with them. You have to basically babysit and carry them along because Pad is not intuitive and it makes a tremendous difference if the account has actual useful starting cards, so you're not going through the process of re-rolling, and it'll just make a more seamless transition. And if she is not interested after all of that, you still have your alt account to play with. Christopher Kotoraski says, been watching me for a while. Greatly appreciate the content. Continuously wishing you the best. Have a great week. I definitely appreciate that positivity, Christopher. Trevor King asks, is a hot dog a sandwich? I feel like the answer is yes. I actually went to Wikipedia because that's a great place to find information. And a sandwich constitutes as food contents being held in place by bread of some kind. So I feel like a hot dog bun has that kind of shape. It's still technically bread, so I would say yes, a hot dog is a sandwich. Ghastly Hunter says, can I try this team in Shura? Unfortunately, I don't have a Remu, so it's going to be incredibly hard to actually make this team work. But at the same time, I feel like, what difficulties are you having in Shura Realm? I feel like if you are having a challenge, I feel like this is the team that you are using, where are you dying and why are you dying? I feel like that's what you have to determine. Like, is it because it takes too long for like your damage absorb or color absorbs to come up from Mega Awoken Dantalion because Reach's hat is incredibly long cooldown? I feel like you need to figure out why you are dying. I just can't run that team in particular. Thomas Walker asks or says, I think that collabs like Magic the Gathering, Power Rangers, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Will ever return to North America? And do I think we will ever get a Mobile Suit Gundam? It's impossible to know if things are going to come back or return. Like, I don't know how these things work, but something has to be obviously arranged on Gung-Ho's part to bring them back. And I am not sure what is more profitable, rerunning a collab or making a brand new collab and having more people roll it. Because at least from my point of view, a brand new collab with new cards means players will probably be rolling more as opposed to something that already came beforehand. Could be mistaken, but again, it is sadly impossible to determine whether or not something will return or whether or not something will actually come to North America. Music at NA brackets LOL asks, do I ever think KNY, which is Demon Slayer if I'm not mistaken, will get announced? If so, why? Kind of tying into Thomas's question, I don't have a crystal ball, unfortunately. I can't see the future. If it comes to North America, fantastic. If it doesn't, obviously that's going to be sad. For T-Born, they'd like to thank me for making interesting videos on Pad that even as a new player can follow, which is themselves. And then they have multiple questions, some related to Pad, some unrelated. Firstly, how can I make a Norza team good as a new player with not a lot of water element cards with skill boosts? I feel like you're at relatively early content. And if you're at that point, don't even care about using water cards. Just get things with skill boosts and transform and let Norzas basically carry you to victory. I don't know what your second active skill solution is. Is it another Norza? Even if it's a Yuri or just something else with a 1-turn or 2-turn cooldown, that's enough. I'm just going to make the assumption that you are not playing endgame content. So just populate your team with literally anything that gets you to transform sooner and have whatever utility Norza doesn't bring. So that means you probably should bring some damage absorb counter. You should probably don't even need unable to match orb effect if you're a really early game. So damage absorb, poison resist, blind resist. If you have those three, because you already have Cloud through Norza and you have RCV and time buffs, you probably should be okay. They ask, when do I think the key heroes will make the return? Kind of tying into Thomas and Music's questions. I don't know when anything will return. Soon? It's Gung-Ho owned, so there's no reason why it shouldn't return on a regular basis. Thirdly, do I know Attack on Titan? And if I do know it, what do I think of it? Sadly, I am not familiar with that franchise whatsoever, and I noticed there were a couple other questions asking about anime or manga, and I don't consume that kind of content, unfortunately. And then fourthly, what things does Pad do better than other games in general, not just mobile games? So the thing that Pad has done so well is that the key gameplay mechanic, which is the orb matching and puzzling, is kind of timeless when you really think about it. There is, to a certain extent, an infinite skill ceiling involved in Pad. you can always get better, I guess is the way to put it. And even if you are at the very top, you might even still have room for improvement, but it's still a challenge. And I think the key with any game is that the key mechanic has to be engaging, because when you really think about it, all gachas, if you take a step back, is really just a glorified collection game. You're kind of collecting stuff. And if the core gameplay mechanic isn't fun enough, you're probably not going to be that interested. Like for myself, I play Fire Emblem Heroes, and it's the only other gacha game that I've played long term, but I play very casually, and it is largely a collection game. Like I've got my Edelgard plus 10, and that's all that matters to me. But the gameplay is reasonable, but Pad's gameplay is much more intricate and much deeper by comparison. So core gameplay mechanic needs to be the main selling point for any gacha, because otherwise you're just a glorified collection casino. Oh, geez, I'm not going to be able to pronounce your name, Rodriguez George Eduardo. I can't say your first name, unfortunately. I'm afraid of butchering it. But they say they have a Norza and Kamen Rider Blades team. Do I know a sub with a good skill boost and reduce awoken bind in the active? What I suggest is you go to Illumina.com and plug in all the parameters. The best way to find something in your monster box is use Illumina.com. Like, the in-game search features are definitely better, but if you're wanting specific active skills, Illumina.com is the way to go. Harrydo says, hey, it's me again. Hope you're doing well. Not related to Pad, but what is my go-to Fire Emblem Heroes team or hero? So I just said Edelgard. So I have Legendary Edelgard, the one that has Raging Storm. Basically, it can hit once and then gets to go again, and then there's Gale Force in her. So basically, she can hit 3 times. I gave her Heavy Blade for an attack def solo for the seal. She has, I think, 90 effective damage when she smacks you. Most things die. She moves again, smacks someone else. It's just fun to do. She basically can solo most things that don't have null follow-up attack, and a lot of red things still get melted by her, because as long as they don't one-shot her, I'll bonk you twice and you're probably dead. But for my friend code, I actually just linked it, or not linked it, I just replied as a comment to you, so add me away there, and I guess I'll try to remember to accept it. I don't look at that often. Candy says, do I think Sena will eventually lose her power in the future? Most cards of the top meta eventually lose their strength of beating the newest dungeon. That is what happened to Amino and Saria Thor. Do I think they'll buff Sena next time Mystics comes around? Well, everything gets power creep. That's just the way of any game, to be honest, especially gacha style games. There has to be power creep or things get stale. If Sena remained the best card of the best leader and was always going to be the best leader for a prolonged period of time, it's going to get stale and fall flat. And it's more so we have to think of what kind of mechanics are going to really punish her, because she builds such an effective system team. So things that shut her down are excessive orb blocking and orb troll. That's the only real way to truly kill her. And I guess lots of resolves. And it makes it possibly a little harder to always have 5 hardos, but with her active, you can kind of overcome it. So I feel like, yes, she will be power crept, but I think as a bigger blanket statement, what Gung-Ho needs to do to possibly change the meta is punish transforming cards somehow more. Like right now, transforming is just so much better compared to not transforming. Like if you look at my Sena and teams, like it has mostly transforming cards. And once I do transform, which is definitely doable, there are creative ways to get it done, you're so much stronger compared to other teams. So I feel like Gung-Ho has to do something about transforming. It has to be stronger than not transforming because the skill boost requirements, but at the same time the payoff is so much better that there's less motivation to use non-transforming cards. I feel like that's something I'm actually going to be talking about in a subsequent video article. It's still a work in progress. It takes a long time, but I'm writing a state of the game, kind of what I did last July, kind of like taking a step back and looking at Pad as a bigger picture. And one of the bigger issues is transforming is just superior. It's just better, and I'm trying to think of ways to make it more manageable in the sense that it's not the best thing all the time. Kevin Nguyen says, do I think the rolling rates are the same no matter what time of the day it is? They've got this theory that where if a person rolls at night, they'll roll the rarest card. It has happened to you 5 times, re-roll the top rating at night. It might just be luck. It is definitely just luck. I don't think there is any special secret hack to doing better in gacha games. It's just luck, and really hedging yourself against luck is just saving up more rolls and rolling harder in an event. It would be nice if Pad had a pity breaker system of some kind, but again, the best way to do it is just save up lots of orbs and roll hard when it's a meaningful event. James Miller says, what do I think on how to power up the enemies in the future to balance power meta? Do I think they'll make the damage cap higher? That way they can do 150% shield enemies. I don't think they need to raise damage cap. By keeping damage cap the way it is already kind of like a cap. It is a cap on how much output you can deal. And when you have damage cap in conjunction with high effective health through damage reduction, you make things that are hard to deal with. Like, for example, the Minoas in World of Carnage 1, Shura 1, they are well designed because it is incredibly hard to one-shot them. You're going to have to take multiple turns. And I like the idea of having to take multiple turns to kill a spawn. Like Gills in the Shura 2 or Ruler of Hell's Hall, I think it's a well-designed boss because you need minimum 2 turns to kill him, no matter what. And even then, I don't think you really can one-shot him twice from full health. I don't think that's really going to be doable, at least for a while at this point in time. So it makes it so it feels more meaningful. You have to, like, actually play through mechanics. So I like the fact that there is a damage cap. It can be a little annoying at first, but once you realize you have to grind things out, it becomes much more manageable. So I like where it is for that regards. The only way to truly, like, power up spawns potentially is giving more super resolve or even multiple stage super resolve or things that resurrect, kind of like Gills. The idea is if you can make a spawn last for more than one turn, it's a bit more interesting because to a certain extent the meta is you encounter a spawn, one shot it, no problem, move on to the next. That's kind of where we are right now. So having ways that force players to spend multiple turns on a spawn I think is a bit more interesting from a gameplay point of view. Curry Water says, have I ever tried playing chess before? I did when I was tremendously young, and I think I was reasonably good at it, but again, I'm a little kid, and I don't really have much competition, so I have no idea how good I actually was. I think I was just probably better than average. I knew the rules, that probably just gave me a leg up on all of the other elementary school kids. What kind of board games do I like to play? I enjoy deeper and heavier board games. I don't mind if it's co-op or player versus player PvP, but longer games I tend to prefer, mostly because it has a more satisfying build-up. Like, what's my top favorite board game? My top favorite board game is Spirit Island. And Spirit Island is great solo. It's great at 2-player. Not so great at multiple players because I think it gets a little too slowed down. But it takes probably an hour and a half for me to play through, maybe 2 hours for a solo game. And I have enough time to get a satisfying build-up and a meaningful, like, conclusion resolution, so to speak. Like, I build up in power and strength, and I can do all the cool stuff I was hoping to do. If the game is too short, you may not have that wonderful kind of exciting build-up. So I like at least medium to longer length games for that reason, but I'm still not against shorter games like Dominion, Everdell, Viticulture. They're like at least a bit more straightforward games, a little less playtime, not as much build-up either, but again, you can knock out a game in a much shorter duration. Janice Franco says, do I read any manga like Naruto or Bleach? Do I watch any anime? I don't consume manga nor anime. I just read lots and lots of books, like just dystopic, sci-fi, sometimes fantasy novels. And like, I guess I can kind of side note branch to say like what I'm reading. I think someone else may have asked. I skimmed through the questions before I make this video, but currently reading Dune, or Children of Dune. It's book 3 of Dune. Book 3 of the Dune series. I'm on page 194. Prior to that, some of the better books, I think that's another question, I'll answer that later, but basically I read mostly sci-fi dystopic novels, and anyone has recommendations, that's always appreciated, of course. I always like looking forward to reading new and exciting stuff. Steve is asking, why isn't Horus a staple sub on Sena teams? If board locks are a huge problem for her, why don't we see them more often? I think for myself, if I just gave myself Jammer Surge and Poison Surge across my whole team, Locked Orbs are no longer really a problem. I'm not going to really get orb trolled as dangerously. So I feel like if I just put those extra lanes, I haven't played World of Carnage 2 lately, since the Devil title clear. I'm trying to minimize what I do with my wrists, but I think the main reason is if you can overcome those things, it's not as necessary. Because Horus's base active skill, like, I guess it is nice that you do get a time buff, you also get an orb or board unlock, but if the spawns are not going to be causing you to get locked orbs and it's manageable, then it may not be as needed. Yes, they have low base cooldown. Yes, they have reasonable amount of skill boost. You can easily inherit delay and other stuff on top, but at the same time, you might have other options for them. Like, I think they are still strong. It's just a matter of what other things you have at your disposal. Like, do you have Gillians, you have Grandis, you have Shivas, etc., etc. Like, what else do you have? I feel like Horus plays more of a utility-based role. Like, if you don't have, like, say, Gremry or Yusil, a Goldfish Girl, you need something to carry that important, like, unable to match orb clear or full bind or Woken bind clear. Horus could be a meaningful solution. Rawl Bastidaz says, in my opinion, what can Gung Ho do to slow down power creep but keep the game interesting? There's giving an example of new units that may not be competitive or use an endgame content, but are more fun while still being viable for new dungeons, or emphasis on mechanics or stipulation without being gimmicky, like 5-star. I think what Gung Ho needs to do is have other types of game modes, so to speak. Like 5-star rarity challenges, like they're kind of restricted, they're kind of annoying, but at the same time, I'm just trying to think like what other kind of game mode can they create that retains the puzzling mechanic? Because as I mentioned before, the puzzling mechanic is the key to success for Pad. So it has to have a dungeon, like you have to be playing through a dungeon where you're matching orbs still, but how can they make it in such a way? I'm not sure of what they can do to truly make it that interesting, I feel. But maybe perhaps it would be like just having more fixed teams. But then again, if it's more fixed teams, it doesn't encourage people to roll. But again, fixed team challenges I think are interesting because you're forced to use a playstyle that's not necessarily optimal, but it obviously can clear the dungeon. So perhaps more of those types of things, like more events where it's like a fixed team style challenge, or even like fixed leaders. They give you a fixed leader, you populate the subs as you want. Like I think those might be a way to kind of create a little bit more diversity in terms of what you can bring for dungeons. Bob Chenif says, what do I use to stream my devices to the computer? Well, I used to use an Elgato, and now I'm using AirServer. AirServer is wireless. It's working quite well for myself, so that's how I get my screen to my computer. But then to actually record stuff and upload it to YouTube or stream on Twitch, I use OBS or Streamlabs OBS. That's what I utilize. So basically, I capture my screen and sound with AirServer. There's a screen on I have two monitors. There's a screen on my computer, and then my OBS is capturing that screen, and obviously I have the desktop sounds playing through, and that's basically how I capture my screen and stream it and whatnot. But basically, you need to have a strong enough computer if you want to stream. Uploading stuff to YouTube, it doesn't require as much internet or computer power, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, those are the main ideas. So I use Streamlabs or Streamlabs OBS to stream and upload videos, and then I use AirServer to capture my game. Bro asked, how did I meet Pancake? I actually met Pancake 5+ years ago. So what is it now? It's 2015. In December of 2015, I met her through Tinder. Tinder works. Like, online dating, I think, is a perfectly viable way to meet someone. Or more so, online dating is whatever you want it to be. I never used online dating prior to meeting Pancake, but I wanted to meet someone for a relationship. You can definitely use Tinder for other goals, but for myself, it was to find a relationship. And at the same time, there are definitely like-minded individuals on Tinder or other dating sites that are looking for a relationship, and it's a matter of finding those type of people. If you're looking for something else, you definitely can find that as well. Kelleher UK says, hi, Mantastic, just a quick question. Have Gung Ho NA ever approached me for a job opportunity? They know sometimes turning a hobby into work can kill the love, but you seem as being a perfect fit for promotion and relaying events to the community in a way for us to understand. I am the perfect hype man for Pad. I think that would not be a bad thing. Like, I think it'd be a reasonably strong fit for myself for sure, but sadly never being approached. Like, if you we're playing years and years ago, I had some contact every once in a while of like Antonio and Michael, and I thought they were great members of Gung Ho staff. The current Gung Ho staff, I don't think they're maybe understaffed, or maybe they're just not as involved in the community. I think like the streams have obviously slowed down, but Antonio and Michael, like, they had their own unique charm. I'm not as like up to date on the current staff, but at the same time, I don't feel like they're interacting as much. I could be mistaken, of course, but none of them have interacted with me as of the last many years. So obviously I don't think that's going to necessarily come to fruition. Jacob Han asked for chances of Demon Slayer coming to North America. Same answer as basically every other question that asks about timing or possibility of events coming. It is impossible for me to know. You could flip a coin, and that would probably be just as accurate as me guessing. And Zineng says, KR just announced Demon Slayer collab coming soon. Do I expect North America to get it too? Is it worth spending your stones? Well, if it does come, I'm definitely going to look much more closely, but Demon Slayer has many cards that are difficult to replicate with what we have available, so it's going to fill many holes in many monster boxes. Ruben Ortiz says, how do I make a very good team in Puzzle & Dragons for AA 1 to 6? That's an incredibly vague question, unfortunately, but the best thing you can do is look up a dungeon and think of the leader you want to use, and then you look up every mechanic or notable mechanic and try and counter them. If that is difficult to understand, a blanket statement is have a damage absorb counter, so a Fujin style active skill, have full blind, have full poison resist, have cloud resist, have awoken bind clear. If you have those 5 things, you're probably going to be able to deal with most mid-game dungeons, and even some of the harder dungeons as well. Like, those are the most common annoying mechanics. I'm assuming you have a way to deal with resolve and a way to deal with voids already. So those 5 things: blind, poison, cloud, awoken bind clear, damage absorption counter. Those 5 are pretty good baseline for building things off of. Like, if you go into a dungeon blind and you have those things, you're going to be able to counter a good chunk of the mechanics. Rapping Grandma says, what are some of my favorite philosophers that I've read? I have not... Oh, sorry, and have I dived into people like Aristotle, and I can't pronounce names, and so on? No, I haven't really read much of those things. Like, I have read, like I said, mostly things like dystopic novels, sci-fi, fantasy. Like, those are primarily what I read. Like, I haven't even read The Prince, which is something I've kind of been thinking about doing. It's kind of like on my list of things I should read. Like, The Prince, it's kind of like the template for how dictators can rule, basically. It's an interesting read from what I've heard, but like, a lot of books that I've read kind of explore those concepts, I guess, as well. But I don't know, it's hard to say. Like, at least lately, I've been kind of looking up, like, what books have won, like, the Hugo Awards or Nebula or, like, those major, literary awards. And I've been kind of, like, reading those books. And I find those are interesting, at least for myself. Joshua says, hey, Mantastic, wanted to ask 2 questions. I mentioned in my other Q&A videos that I thought damage absorption was a bad mechanic. How would I improve it? And if it cannot be done, what would you remove it outright from the game? I would say the best thing is to remove it outright. But if that is not doable, make it so spawns that have damage absorption are not 999 turns or 99 turns. Make it like maximum 5. With 5 turns, you're forced to stall, but you will get through it eventually, and then you're okay. Like I said in previous comments, taking more than 1 turn on a given floor is not a bad thing. We have definitely got to the point where the meta is one shot, speed. But at the same time, I don't think it makes the most interesting dungeons overall. But with a damage absorption spawn, you have to have that active skill. You're never passing the dungeon otherwise. Like Machine Athena in the various arenas, you will never wait 99 turns. If you didn't have damage absorption, you're probably going to quit or just die from her anyways. The point of the matter is, damage absorption, maybe it can exist, but it needs to not be the 999 turns or 99 turns. And Gung Ho keeps it that way to force players to acquire those cards. I think it's a little scummy, personally, because there's no way to counter it. Like, the damage absorption Leighton is hot garbage right now. Like, it's not working. Like, unless they change that, damage absorption remains as a terrible mechanic because there's no way to puzzle your way through it. I'd remove it entirely if it was up to me, but as a better compromise, perhaps, just have it so it's maximum maybe 5, maybe 10 turns. Either way, make it so players are forced to stall a little bit, but it eventually will go away and you can still clear the dungeon. As for their second question, as someone who's interested in learning how to cook, what resources would I recommend for a beginner such as myself? Well, amusingly, I had a tremendously old cookbook from, like, I don't know, probably the 90s from my parents. And, like, I read through it when I was younger, just looking through it. And, like, it provided pictures and incredibly basic recipes, but at the same time, it was like a cookbook for beginners to give you basic culinary tips. And the first, like, maybe like 20, 30 pages was just like basic terminology, basic concepts. And I thought that was quite helpful. Like, finding a beginner style cookbook would not be a bad idea, but better yet, what might be better is possibly watching videos. Maybe you learn through watching. And for myself, I found Gordon Ramsay, not Gordon Ramsay on Hell's Kitchen or reality TV shows, but Gordon Ramsay when he is like just cooking at home. I find he is quite informative. Like, he talks through his thought processes. He tells you why he's doing this. So you have to figure out how you want to learn said information. You're going to get like a beginner's cookbook that gives you those basic terminologies and terms and concepts, or watching those types of videos. And then after that, the next best thing that I can recommend to you is that color is flavor. Like, let's say you're cooking ground beef. Do you want it to be gray and soggy? Doesn't sound as appealing. Or do you want it to be brown and crispy? You want it to be probably brown and crispy. Color is flavor. Using oil and fats to cook things helps with that, of course. High heat, less cooking time, again, helps in that regards. Another thing is use fresh ingredients if possible. Like for myself, my holy trinity, or I guess four, I guess, is like I utilize garlic, ginger, serrano peppers, and green onions. Green onions are possibly like more in the garnishy land, but using the white part of green onions and frying those up, like for making like sauces, I would fry up ginger, garlic, the white parts of green onions, and serrano peppers. I fry those up for a long time, and then I'm always boiling a giant pot of stock. Like I throw in my bones, water, salt, and those ingredients as well, except for the serrano, like green onion, ginger, garlic, throw them in the pot, boil it for days. Makes a delicious stock. I can use that whenever you add liquid. You always add liquid when you're cooking oftentimes, so why not use stock? But backtracking a bit, you fry up ginger, garlic, serrano, green onions in a pan, and then you can add a bit of that stock, and now you have a delicious sauce. And eventually you strain out the solids. Like you're not going to want to bite into a chunk of ginger, but now you have an incredibly flavorful sauce as a base for whatever you're doing. It could be for soups, it could be for sauces, glazes, whatever it is. But utilizing a bit of fresh ingredients and frying them up makes a big difference in flavors, at least I feel. And then afterwards, it becomes trial and error. You're going to learn what goes well with things. Like, if you want to make a really nice, like, gentle curry flavor, you'll put, like, turmeric, cinnamon, and coriander. Add those when you're frying up those dry ingredients, and then you add the liquid. You kind of have a curry-like sauce. You add some coconut milk. Wow, you've got an instant, flavorful curry. Things like that. Trial and error. But having a mixture of... You need diversity when making dishes. Like you need to have things that are soft, things that are crunchy, crispy, different textures play a role, different types of flavors, like a bit of salty, a bit of sweet almost, maybe even a bit of bitter, slight bitter, maybe a touch of sour. Like a variety helps create a much more interesting palate, but experimentation, but utilize those fresh ingredients for sure. Colasatron Productions says, how do I control myself from dropping a bunch of stones on rolls? They find it rather hard to save all their stones, which makes them unable to roll for an event when they care about it comes out. Well, I have the advantage of having a much older account, which has a much deeper monster box. I have acquired a great deal of cards, and the amount of holes in my monster box, so to speak, are probably less like Swiss cheese compared to other boxes. So I have less motivation to roll because to get an upgrade is much harder, and usually cards that are upgrades to what I have currently available tends to be the next big thing, so to speak. So what I tend to do is I just keep saving. I don't roll because I think to myself, what are the odds of me getting something that is going to meaningfully advance my monster box? If the answer is not much, then I won't roll. But then because of that, I'll have banked a lot of stones. And then when an event does come out that is meaningful, like the most recent Player's Choice Godfest, which has had really high Godfest exclusive rates, I rolled pretty hard. And of course the payout is great because I have a much larger sample size for rolling, so it kind of evens out the bad luck, so to speak. So I think the key is you need to like look at an event and say, will this help advance my progress? If it's not going to help advance your progress, you should ask, why am I rolling? Theo Hem asks, would I ever consider starting a JP account? Hypothetically, if the NA server were to end, would I continue playing on JP? To be honest, I'm not sure. Like, I have tried, at least long ago in the distant past, but like starting a gacha game from scratch is tough. Especially if it's a game I'm already familiar with, then I'm thinking, well, I could have had all this beforehand. Like, this is kind of like I'm grinding up for things that I've done already. It doesn't feel as satisfying. Like, I know obviously the new player experience is rapidly advanced by comparison, but I don't know, like just being able to see words in the language I can understand is nice. So I don't know if I would even switch. And I have tried in the past, but it just didn't stick with me. Mr. Koo says, hope it's all right to ask 3 questions. It is more than all right to ask 3 questions. First question is, have I ever considered learning some of the pronunciation patterns of Japanese? The only reason I ask is because in some of my videos, I sometimes struggle to say characters' names. For example, a name I cannot pronounce, Konho, I can't go any further after that. And for some, I say they're quite different from the pronunciations. For example, Akine is more like Akine. Okay, well, there you go. See, I'm clearly bad at this. And then, yeah, a bunch more examples I'm not going to be able to pronounce, unfortunately. Not that there's anything wrong with the way I do things right now, though. So I'd suggest this in case there's something you might be interested in. Here's a bonus one for fun they don't know until looking up the other day. Polone is actually pronounced Polone. Well, that is good to know. I don't know. I think I have difficulty pronouncing stuff in any language. Like I write and read often, but I think this is a bit of a folly on my own part. Like when I read stuff, I don't seem to see all the letters necessarily. I kind of see some letters and my brain just kind of fills it in and thinks this is the word and this is how it's supposed to be pronounced. And I think another problem with that is I'm terrible at spelling. Like I rely so much on autocorrect or spell check that like I don't know how to spell many of the longer words that I write. Like I write long like articles and I sometimes use like big words, so to speak. I don't necessarily know how to spell them. I know how to use them properly, but I don't know how to spell them. And I think my lack or inability to know how to spell things hinders my pronunciation, because I remember when I was a kid and there was always like spelling tests in elementary school, I would struggle because I didn't know how to pronounce the word necessarily, and then because I don't know how to sound it out, I couldn't spell it, or conversely, I'd be pronouncing it wrong and spelling it wrong. So I'm not sure why that's the case. Like I said, like I read plenty of books, but I do find I kind of like see a few letters, the first, last letter, and maybe a couple letters in between, and I kind of fill in the blanks, so to speak, and think this is this word, especially for the longer words that are hard to pronounce. So I'm not sure like how that came about, but either way, I think I struggle just pronouncing names in general, not just Japanese names, it's just everything to begin with. The second question is, have I ever played Coup, the deduction-based card game? I've played it years and years ago, and I think it was a reasonable kind of party-style game. Party-style games are not really my cup of tea. As mentioned before, I tend to like the bit heavier. Like I like the deeper games that are less luck-based, more skill-based, more planning. They reward planning or the ability to pivot based on new information that's given to you. So like I've tried it in the past, but for kind of like those kind of party style, like lighthearted games, in my current collection, I have Here to Slay, which is basically like, what's it called? It's basically like Exploding Unicorns or Unstable Kittens. Very similar to that type of game. Party style game, fast, fun, luck based. Don't take it too seriously. And I also have like Mountains of Madness. It's a fun game when people are like inebriated a little bit, because there's a lot of it's a communication game with restrictions. It's quite fun and exciting, but you don't play it very often, kind of like party style games. I don't like playing them often, and again with COVID I haven't played a party game in so long. Then lastly, do I have any tips for the mental aspect of pain management, like staying mentally strong and such? Well, for myself, a little bit, I think you know my little bit of background, but it happened on July 6, 2014. Like this date has been ingrained in my mind when I first got injured. And it is a challenge. Like all your hopes and dreams are basically dashed right away. And you have to build a new life. And you didn't plan for that. Like I did not plan for being unable to move, etc. Like I did not plan for that. So it's tough. And what you need to do is readjust your expectations. Like for myself and my own mental health, this is a long topic in itself. Like I struggle with mental health constantly, but for things that have helped me personally is reducing my exposure to the outside world, so to speak. Like I have cut out social media from my life. Like I know, like I am a YouTuber, I upload YouTube videos, but I don't really watch YouTube. Like I said, I watch Gordon Ramsay's videos. I watch like a couple of them every couple of months at most. Those sort of things. I've watched a couple of videos about painting techniques, but other than that, like other than like the like kind of like educational research, so to speak, for my own personal activities, I don't go on YouTube. I don't browse videos. I don't just like watch like auto plays and just go down that rabbit hole. I had Facebook. I no longer have a personal Facebook. I don't need to look at other people's lives going well. And at the same time, Facebook is an inaccurate representation. You're seeing the highlights of someone's life. And when I'm stuck at home, constantly in pain, unable to do things that I want to do, it doesn't feel pleasant. Same idea of Twitter. Like I have a Twitter. It basically just auto posts what I publish. I'm not using it necessarily for like the purpose of like interacting, so to speak. Like I find that like if I just communicate and interact with the small circle of people in my life, the meaningful interactions I have, I find that has helped, because constantly comparing yourself to other people does not help, especially when you're in a situation where you can't do things, which is not necessarily something that was by choice. Like I can go for walks for a couple of blocks and it hurts. Even sitting here, it's hurting my neck. And usually past noon time, my productivity just greatly goes down. I just can't do too much. So like you have to like readjust expectations. Like it sounds bad, but aim low, or more so aim realistic. Like for myself, like I set goals throughout the day. Like I'm becoming more like a house husband overall, to be honest, because that's kind of all will achieve in the future. Like, I'm not going to get better. It's probably just going to keep getting worse. But I try to do small tasks every day and then one bigger task. Like, I try and do like stuff for YouTube or my website or stream, and then I try and do like one little bigger task. It could be like, say, vacuuming the condo. Something small like that, like small in the grand scheme, but it's a little bigger for me. It's hard for me to do. So I do things like that, but I do it slowly. Like, just, you have to set lower expectations and take your time. But at the same time, because I'm not going down that like rabbit hole of like social media, I spend so little time on my devices. Like, I don't really spend much time on my devices looking at stuff. So with that extra time, I just put towards like accomplishing the smaller tasks. Like, when Pancake comes home from work, I try to have dinner ready and waiting on the table for her. Those types of things. But readjusting your expectations and realizing that you may not necessarily be like super special and super successful has helped myself. It may sound depressing, but I think at least 2020 I was much happier compared to 2019 and beyond and prior. Like, my mental health was stronger in 2020, which sounds a little counterintuitive because of COVID, but it's because of those small changes I've made. I know that was a long question. I feel like that's just a big topic I probably could ramble on a long time about, because it's something that does impact me personally. But either way, setting more realistic goals and cutting back on unhealthy / toxic practices. That's been the best thing for myself. Ricky Farrellesi, I can't pronounce any of that, unfortunately. Sorry, Ricky. But they have a question for a while about niche mechanics and pad. Do I think that I'll see a meta leader that uses niche mechanics for active leader skills, such as using bomb orbs, mirror active for freely moving orbs, howling solo, self-bind, etc.? The problem with those types of actives that are truly wonky, I'm going to call it wonky, just to give it a word, is that it's hard to build a team around it. Like, we're going to go back a little bit in time to like when Jammer meta or Poison meta tried to make an appearance. And the problem is, if you need to rely on Jammers or Poison Orbs, well, some bosses interact with them in much more dangerous ways, so that's a problem. But more so, there are 6 different types of orbs, and a 16.7% chance for each one to appear. If you have Jammer Skyfalls now coming, the odds of you acquiring every orb goes down. And matching just Jammers or just Poison Orbs doesn't actually kill anything. You have to actually match the primary color attribute of the card itself. Maybe if you match Jammers, they gain damage from the card itself, as if they were a purple card. You match purple orbs, they do damage. Maybe that's a way to possibly do it. But at the same time, there are too many spawns that interact negatively with hazard orbs. So I think it's tough to use kind of like those like wonky mechanics. On the flip side, what Gung Ho has been doing is incorporating negative penalties in conjunction with active skills to lower the cooldown. So, for example, like Chibi Erd is something I'm using quite a bit lately for SDR farming. And Chibi Erd's active skill gives you a self-attack debuff, but it lowers the cooldown because you're debuffing yourself. And it also can overwrite other debuffs as well. But the point is, like, I think like self-harming active skills, so to speak, or even leader skills that have to be compensated in some way. So for active skills, they're compensated by having a much stronger effect for the cooldown. For the leader skills, oftentimes like no Skyfall is kind of like the detriment. And look at Valentine's Ideal. She has no Skyfall, but great other metrics to compensate. So I don't think we're going to necessarily get to like those wonky mechanics like utilizing bomb orbs or like more self-binds through Halloween Suo. I think it's too hard because all the cards nowadays, unless they release so many cards that support that meta, it's not going to really take off, I feel. For Sean, they're asking, "Hi, Mantastic, just wondering, do I or have I ever played a musical instrument?" Sadly, the answer is no. I never was musically inclined. If you heard me sing, you are going to, you'll be horrified. Apparently, I have a terrible singing voice. Like, Pancake tells me when I tried to sing on stream, my viewers would tell me as well. I can admit it. My singing voice is not good. But I feel like I have a relatively strong narration and talking voice, so it's kind of weird, but I'm apparently tone deaf. And at the same time, maybe perhaps not having any musical instrument training or exposure has possibly made it so I'm worse at singing. By comparison, my younger sister is actually quite accomplished at piano. She finished grade 10 and all that jazz. She's learning guitar. Like, she is the musically oriented person in my family. My parents didn't play instruments. I didn't. I was kind of the test dummy child as the oldest. My sister kind of like, "Oh, you're a bit younger. Okay, we should have done this. Let's do this." Like, the first child is usually the test subject. But either way, I never was musically inclined. I don't think I ever will be, but who knows? Like, I have a nice narration voice, and I'll just keep it at that. Panda Blender says, hello, Mantastic. Thank you for all of my hard work. They've been following me for years. They're about 2,600 days playing Pad, similar to what I've been playing. Fantastic overall. And their question is related to the Cross and L leaders. I know these style of leaders are not popular and meta-changing, but in my opinion, what kind of revamp buff would be required to make more incentives for player to use these? So, Cross and L leaders, they're kind of similar to Blob when you really think about it. They need to have 5 orbs. Blob leaders usually are 6 for that row. So, what are making Blob leaders strong? That's what we have to look at. And what makes, okay, more so, let's take a step back. What makes a leader strong? And what makes a leader strong is consistency. Generally speaking, those Cross and L leaders, they're inconsistent, not just because they have an orb hungry requirement, which can be solved through like kind of systemable things like Norza or like Sena, but the bigger hurdle is those leaders tend to be more feast or famine, so to speak. Because if you match their pattern, you are incredibly hard to kill. Like Heart Cross was a perfect example. You have 1 times health multiplier, 75% damage reduction with dual leaders. If you make the Heart Cross, you don't die. If you can't make the Heart Cross, you die. And that's inconsistent. And that's not going to make a good leader. You have to be consistent. So to compensate for that, you would have to have leader skills that are more forgiving. They need to have flat health multipliers to tank hits when they cannot match the required pattern. If that is able to occur, they can become much more viable, because when you think about it, they're just as orb hungry as Blob leaders, but it's the inconsistency of not matching their pattern that means they're vulnerable. That is the biggest thing that has to change. And another thing is creating more like high efficiency system cards like Norza and Sena, Yux, Ferrule. They're incredibly potent systemable cards. And we need more of those that support leader skills that have those types of mechanics, so to speak. So I feel like we can have a strong systemable card and just flat health multipliers and some damage reduction tied to the activation. That's what we can make those more relevant, so to speak, overall. And then, of course, sprinkle in like auto fall attack, bonus combos, that sort of a thing can help out as well. Anton Hesselink says they have a Sena team and they cannot beat Shura 2. They have Sena of Amino plus 5 SDRs, Grandis with I think that's the triple team health one with 5 SDRs, Shiva with Dark Magician for the big delay with SDRs, Sindragon Wrath with Harpy Lady for the follow-up attack and Poison Surge, nice. Horus with the Belt Rider plus SDRs. So the first floor, you use Dark Magician to assist a stall, and then pop both Horuses and the Wrath skills, then kill them after you transform. So you've overcome the hardest part to a certain extent, is transforming. If you can transform, your life is a little bit easier overall. And then where are you dying? Floor 2, you kill after popping your Horus. Floor 3, you kill all the things, same as 2. Stall. Floor 5, you transform Grandis to utilize the shield. Great, you didn't have to have the health requirement. And then you use the Wrath to clear the binds. But wait, aren't you clearing the binds though? No. 6, floor your Dark Magician. If your leader gets switched after that, you rarely get to floor or pass, so you don't know. So, like, on the Ogres, like, using Grandis' shield is smart, but you're using the delay on Shiva then, and then you're waiting for Wrath. Okay, so I'm just trying to think why you were dying. So you solve the Ogres with Wrath. You also solve it with Grandis, and you're okay. You can kill them, you can stall, and then you have the delay for Shiva. So you're past floor 6. So perhaps one thing that you might want to try and do is wait out mechanics. It could be possible that's what's happening. Like, you're letting mechanics build up. And because the mechanics get piled up, you're unable to overcome future floors because too many other things are happening. If that's the case, maybe take a little bit longer on those floors. Like, say the dark, sticky, blind Skyfall. If that is a big problem, maybe try waiting a few more turns on that floor before outright killing it. Like, blasting through one floor, like every floor one turn at a time, like, it feels nice, but if the mechanics pile up, you're going to have some issues. And the thing is, like, you need to have for floor 6 that attack buff ready. Like, you need to overwrite that attack debuff, for floor 7. So you need to make sure Grandis is ready to go. You also get heavily debuffed, so make sure Horus is active, is also ready to overcome the time debuff as well. So I think it's a matter of, like, not blasting through every floor. Maybe that could be possibly what's happening. Like, I think what would have been helpful for myself is you tell me why you were dying, like what floors do you die, and why is that occurring? Is it because you mismanaged or mismanaged active skills, unprepared, that sort of thing? I think that would be helpful to know like why you're dying. That is applicable for anyone who's dying or struggling in content. Figure out why you are dying to that spawn. But what I can suggest is just go slower. Like after you use Shiva to delay, or after you delay with Shiva against the leader swap, wait it out so Horus's base active is ready to overwrite the time debuff on the following floor. Klexup says, hey, I love the work they put in for the pad community. Has been a great help for years. They are curious what my current thoughts are on the new Saber after Demon Slayer being announced for NA. Is it being announced? Has it been announced? I don't think it's been announced, so it's very difficult to say. Well, like, it has to come. Obviously, if it comes, it's going to make him a much more viable card. But if you are considering like Monster exchanging for it, you should wait till the very last day. Like, generally speaking, it's a good practice to wait till the last day to Monster exchange if you're concerned about future content being announced. Like, you can wait till Monday, because I think that's how long the Monster exchange will be available for. But even then, if it doesn't get announced, I wouldn't trade, because trading in the hopes that something gets announced is not a good strategy overall. It's better to just keep saving your trade fodder overall. Like, it's not a guaranteed to come. If it was guaranteed to come, this would be a different conversation. But at the same time, we don't know if it's going to come. Tyler's asking, why is Mikaj considered so good when his sub pool is so extremely limited to insane whale cards? They honestly rate him lower because Chris is pretty much a requirement, or having 2 Sakuras. They rolled him and it's been useless because their large monster arcs can't form a single team. The big issue is why cards are considered strong is it doesn't care about how hard it is to have specific cards. It's just a matter of, do these cards exist in the game? Yes, we're going to assume you have every single thing. Like, if they have every single thing, it's definitely a much more consistent, much more powerful card and leader to use. But if you don't have those cards, it's definitely much more restrictive. Like, technically, you can use any sub, but I understand the problem you're having. You don't have enough Dark Orb generation to make it viable, and that's the biggest issue. Like, if you have the perfect team for him, incredibly strong. But if you don't have those incredibly low cooldown orb changers, it's going to be a huge struggle, I feel, overall. So you just need to be mindful of the dungeon you're playing through, and you have to just spend so much more conscious effort. Like, Sena, by comparison, is kind of like the pinnacle of mindlessness. You don't need to try very hard, and you don't really die. But matching 3 dark combos is difficult to do, and one mistake means you die. So, like, it has lower consistency, especially when you're not paying attention overall, I feel. Shade, that's 10, 5, 2, so that's 17, asks, hello, thank you for all my cool content. I have some questions I would like to pose. 1, how do I go about making teams for dungeons? Well, I look up the dungeon and I determine all the requirements and build basically a checklist against it. And then I think of the leader I want to use and then base the team building around that checklist. That's the main way to do it. But as I mentioned earlier in the video, having blind, poison, cloud resist, awoken bind clear, and unable to match orb effect clear. Having damage absorption counter. Having those 5 things tends to be a pretty good blanket statement for countering most dungeons if you're not going to look them up. Why did I first begin playing pad? I read a newspaper on the bus when I was commuting, and I read about this new game that was taking over Japan. It was so popular and cool. I'm like, that sounds interesting. Maybe I should go home and download it. So I went home and downloaded it, and of course I got addicted. And that's what happened like 2,600, 2,700 plus days ago. Crazy. This was, I don't even know how many years ago. 2013 maybe? I don't know. So long. It's amazing when I think about it. Are there any franchises I would like to see collaborate with Pad? Well, I'm reading Dune, and I like the Dune universe. I didn't like the second book, but the universe is cool. So it'd be pretty cool if there was a Dune collab. And there is a movie coming out for it. They released a board game for it. Pretty cool. Another thing would be like the Dresden Files. Another fantastic book series. Stormfront is the first book by Jim Butcher. Highly recommend this book series. But if there's a Dresden Files collab, oof, my Magic Stones would be in so much danger. Because this book, I feel like, was kind of like my childhood or my teenagehood growing up. I read so much of this when I was in high school. It was great. But yeah, I think those would be the 2 major franchises that I could think about what I would like to see. Crafted Kitty says, hello, Mantastic. I have a rather subjective question for me. When do I consider the golden age of pad? Is it already behind us? I feel like pad, I agree, the charm of pad has changed, but I think at the same time, it is shifting expectations. When I first started playing pad 700 days ago, the mobile game industry was basically non-existent. There was very few options out there, and we can kind of compare it to other notable games from the past. For me, Warcraft 3 was a big deal. StarCraft was not as big, but I know it's a big thing. These older games, there wasn't much competition, so we played them, and they are great games, but because we had no other options of what else we could play, we stuck with them. And to a certain extent, that may have made us more nostalgic. Pad, when I think about the early pad days, it wasn't that great. But I look back at it fondly because I had nothing better, and at the time it was cutting edge. But I would not want to spend hours grinding Ocean of Heaven for maybe a few pluses. When I think about that now, that's absurd. But at the time, there was nothing to compare it to. So that grinding challenge is a completely different kind of fun, I feel like. I don't know if it was necessary. It was satisfying when it was done, but at the time it was kind of... But I feel like if Pad came out in 2021, it would not be a successful game. If they kept the same progression, it would not be successful, because right now I feel like games in general are more about instant gratification, getting you hooked quickly, and then you move on to the next one. So this is kind of a big topic in itself, but I feel like those really, really old days of Pad, the very first starting times I'm referencing, Oceans of Heaven, Starlight Sanctuary, it was only really good because we had nothing better to play. I think that's kind of giving that fuzzy image. But at the same time, if we progress a little bit faster, going to when Arena 1 to 3 was released, that was a unique challenge. Grinding was still involved, but the grinding was a little less by comparison, I feel. And the challenge felt quite satisfying because it wasn't... More things could tackle the content because it wasn't as so much mechanic heavy. It was just a bit bigger numbers. They have a bit more health, a bit more damage. And a lot of leaders can deal with that because it's just, can you match better? Or can you stall and hoard orbs and just burst things down? So the playstyle has definitely changed and evolved. Colosseum 1, that time frame was a unique time because we didn't have follow-up attack and resolve was involved. So we had to be quite creative how we killed things. But it was different. It's just different. I think also nowadays, because there's so many different distractions, it's much easier to pick up a game and just put it down if it doesn't instantly satisfy you. So the golden age of Pad... It is quite subjective. I do like the arenas, the late Arena 3 time frame plus Colosseum 1. I thought that was a pretty exciting time. But even 2020, so much content was released and so many stones. We did have a lot more free things to acquire. And yes, I know how the new player experience is gone, but at the same time, when you really, really think about it, was that new player experience that magical? Was grinding for hours for a few pluses that fun? Maybe not. Even now, grinding for SDRs, I'm not grinding that long because it's reasonably fast, the team I have built, but it's still a chore. And I can't imagine doing that with worse drop rates. So I think Pad is still doing quite strong nowadays. Yes, early game is different, but it's kind of falling into that instant gratification category because you need to have that to survive because people will move on if they don't get that fix on a more regular basis. Going through the rest, but they're saying they missed the days of leaders like Miro and Raw Dragon, wherein you had to have to clear a relatively difficult dungeon, save up premium currency to obtain the strongest monsters in comparison to present days, where they just hand out stuff. I think handing out is a little extreme, but rolling more is always fun at the same time. But I think part of the issue is cards get power crept faster, so they give out more currency to roll more, but at the same time, the cards you roll don't last as long, so it kind of evens itself out, so to speak. But yes, I do agree that rolling the new stuff nowadays, you definitely clear up plenty of content. But at the same time, it is an 8-year-old game. Is it really necessary to have that long of an early game phase? A lot of it is outdated. The normal and technical dungeons, the vast majority of them, except at the very top, should really be removed. They serve no purpose nowadays. Playing through arenas should be really what the goal of Pad has now become. So rolling cards that can tackle it is not necessarily a bad thing, because that's kind of what Pad is about, at least to a certain extent nowadays. It's not so much clearing that ocean to heaven in Starlight Sanctuary. It doesn't have that anymore. And they also crafted Kitty says they might be a bit biased because their monthly free God Physics rolls have been garbage, but I would consider the Golden Age of Pad to be somewhere between Raw Dragon Mirror to maybe Anubis Diablos. So yeah, kind of like I said, Arena 3 through Coliseum 1 and Arena 4 time frame, like that was definitely it had a nice balance of like farmable viability, Miru, and rolling for cards that can help you clear content, but it wasn't so obnoxiously mechanic heavy. It still focused a bit more on puzzling. I feel like AA4 is less about puzzling and more about, do you have all the mechanics to counter the stuff that throws at you. Shura 1 is a less mechanic heavy and a bit more puzzling because you have to grind out some spawns. So I find it's a bit better balance, but I still feel like Pad is doing great nowadays. Like, they are giving out content much more frequently. Like, things are happening on a regular basis. Gabe Gonzalez says, how would I approach managing multiple accounts and keeping up with clearing content like monthly challenges and collab stuff? Well, the best answer is co-op. Self-co-op. Play it for yourself. You save half the stamina, you get it done, and you can often create like kind of farming swipe teams. That's the easiest way to do it. And then at the same time, don't stress out about it too much about your alt account. Like, we're now blessed with so much more stamina nowadays, and especially if you add in the watch box space or watch an ad for a free stamina refill. Like, you have so much stamina, so you don't want to get burnt out. So like I said, like, treat your alt account as a way to save stamina for your main, and maybe possibly play with new teams or cards that you don't have in your main account. But I honestly view it as a stamina saving and a resource efficiency tool, at least nowadays. Fantastic has kind of become a bit more like that, just because I don't, like, beforehand, Fantastic was much more involved, because when Pad had 10 minute per stamina, I didn't have a chance to play much, so it was a way for me to play more. So I feel like self-co-op is the best way to do it. And the main reason they asked this is because a few months ago, they got an alt account a few months ago, and they find it difficult to keep up. Self-co-op. And then they also asked, what are my thoughts on cards that require evil materials from specific events? I find it's annoying, especially if they come and go so fast. Like Mystic Spectres, Sin Dragon, Key Heroes, it is a massive grind, and having it not available on a regular basis feels kind of sad. Like, in all honesty, I miss the coin dungeon shop. Like, I don't know why they took it out, because coins do so little nowadays. Most people are at coin cap, I feel. Like, what's the point of them? They serve no purpose. And if you could, say, buy for 100 million coins, we'll use a big number because we all have way more than the cap, let's say. Pick an arbitrary number. Pick a big number. Make that the cost, and you have those dungeons available for, like, several days. That would be a good system. Like, that way you could grind them out during the event, or you could play them at a future time. I think that would be a fairer compromise. Something like that. Bring back coin dungeons. But yeah, that's what I would suggest. Pseudo Cray asks, is story mode dead? Well, story mode, I feel like, should be just treated as a tutorial. It really should be the tutorial. We just got the Haku story mode today or yesterday, and it should be the way to teach players the mechanics of pads. So I think it serves a wonderful purpose in that regards. 2, they asked me to tell us a little about my progression with leaders. Karen was their first. Erd, they know, did a lot of progress for them early on. Then they got Shiva, Ronave, then Edward, and then New Year's Reach, Yugi, and now Mikage. Well, for myself, my first notable rare machine card was, sorry, I had Gabriel first, and Gabriel did nothing. My starter card was actually Healer, the yellow Healer Girl for 4-star. Gabriel was with the first real rare machine card. Served no purpose. I never touched him really. And then I got Sakuya. And Sakuya carried me for so long. So long. So many dungeons were cleared of her. And then the next big step was Lucifer. Not the Archangel Lucifer, but Fallen Angel Lucifer with Dark Rose and Devil teams. That was the first consistent team I used for farming Arena 1. I'm pretty sure I cleared with Sakuya, I think maybe at some point, but I cleared with Lucifer on a regular basis, and that's how I farmed Arena 1. And then after that, it became Miru. Miru was the next big thing. After Miru, can't remember after that. Right now, it's definitely Sena. Obviously, I'm farther along, but that was the progression I had. It went Sakuya, then Fallen Angel Lucifer, Archdemon Lucifer, and then Miru. Those are the big progressions. And then Mary Dionysus, that was the next one after Miru. That's what I used. After that, I think probably Anubis Diablos. I think that was the relative progression for myself. And then thirdly, what other pad YouTubes have I interacted with and watched? Tyler Pad. I never really watched much Tyler Pad because, like I said before, I don't consume YouTube content. And prior to doing my own stuff, Tyler, I think, quit before I even started. So I didn't really discover like pad communities until later on. So I never really watched and interacted with him there. Yuki's had interesting stuff for sure. Like he had every card basically. So it was always interesting to watch him clear stuff with all, like basically having every type of thing available. It was interesting for sure. Not necessarily applicable to the average player, but definitely cool nevertheless. Bira does have helpful videos for sure. I think Bira Pad posts lots of gameplay clears, and they are now starting to provide their thought process behind team building, which I think is a helpful thing because it does shed light on why they brought XYZ into the specific dungeon. Batapet is also fun. I haven't seen him as much, I feel. Maybe I don't spend enough time on YouTube. He always has a very chill approach to the game, not too serious, which is important because this is a game and it's meant to be fun. And SGT, I do appreciate his walkthroughs. Like, it's a different style of walkthrough. Like, it's not necessarily what I do. It's not narrated. It's like text-based. So text-based definitely can be helpful, and obviously he has different teams than I do. And I think it's helpful to watch a wide variety of content creators because everyone has their own personal bias. I'm pretty sure I have my own biases, and it can possibly be a shortcoming if you only consume that content. It could be, potentially. But they also finally end with, thanks for doing these Q&A videos. I'm happy to do them. And Dan McCain says, hello, Mantastic. Did I ever attend university? I did, actually. I attended the University of British Columbia, and I was in land and food systems, and I have a degree in food, nutrition, and health, which is technically a bachelor's of science. I think the bigger issue is I learned how to learn. I think I'm reasonably good at absorbing content and being able to regurgitate it. I think I learned how to do school pretty well in those regards, but in terms of retention, not so great. Even with some of the pad stuff I do, I'll learn them over the couple of days when I'm writing them, and then after a couple of days after publishing it, I forget the majority of it. It just kind of disappears. I don't know. Maybe like I didn't memorize it that well. I memorized the better cards, but the weaker stuff not so much. But I think if you don't have a degree that gives you something truly specific, you're learning how to learn, which is an important skill in itself. But I appreciate you wishing me the best. And then Ben Bula says, what kind of board games do I do myself and Pancake like playing? We enjoy co-op based board games. Co-op based board games tend to be the best for us. It could be narrative and story based, like Tainted Grail, like campaign style, or it could be things like Spirit Island, which I've mentioned many times. But co-op seems to be the best for us because we love each other and we want to work together. We don't want to like bash each other up. Like for PvP competitive games, my mom is the one you want to play with. Like, I love playing board games with my mom as well. And like for Pancake, it's usually co-op based, sometimes PvP, but usually the lighter PvP games. But for my mom, all out PvP. Like, her rationale is, if you're not first place in combat, why bother participating? Even if second place is good rewards, why bother participating if you're not first? If you're not first, you're last. That is my mom's mentality. She is hyper aggressive and she makes good plays. So it's nice having a variety of people to play with. Obviously, with COVID being lifted, I'd probably be interactive with more people, but I like having a variety of board games because it's nice to have a board game to fit every mood, so to speak. And I have never tried the Binding of Isaac Four Souls. I looked it up actually just before this. I'm not a huge fan of the lower complexity games, and according to Board Game Geek, it's a bit lower. And I have enough of those already. I'm not looking for more games to add in that type of category. So that brings me to the conclusion of answering all the questions for the question time. This does take some time to answer, but hopefully you find this helpful and insightful, or maybe just have it running in the background and just hearing my voice narrate stuff over time. But thank you to all the individuals who asked questions. I could not make this video without you, and I do enjoy the wide variety of questions that are not just pad related, because I guess I do have other ramblings I like to talk about. But either way, hopefully all the Mantastic day. I wish you all the best in your own pad adventures, and happy puzzling.